Welcome to the Part S channel. Today we explain Prophets Kings 1, Chapter 9 in a clear and simple way, step by step. Can you imagine working on a single project for 20 years? Well, Solomon has just finished doing exactly that. He's completed the ultimate, massive construction project, building both the temple and his own royal palace. And in response to this monumental achievement, God appears to him for a second time, just like he did years earlier at Gibeon. The message God delivers here, it literally sets the stage for the rest of Israel's history. Okay, let's dive into this explainer and see what happens next.
Here's our roadmap for today's step-by-step study. We're going to cover Section 1, Introduction and Context. Section 2, God's Covenant and Warning. Section 3, The Deal with Hiram. Section 4, Labor, Cities, and Ships. Section 5, Key Ideas and Lessons. And finally, Section 6, a chapter recap. Let's get right into it. Section 1, Introduction and Context, the 20-year project. Let's look at verses 1 and 2. Solomon has finally completed the building of the Lord's temple and his own royal palace. Remember, this wasn't just some quick weekend renovation. As the text reminds us, this was a staggering 20-year project. He built absolutely everything he desired to build. And it's right at this very moment of completion that the Lord appears to Solomon a second time. The text specifically notes that God had appeared to him previously at Gibeon, where Solomon famously asked for wisdom. So now, the construction is finished, and God is officially responding to that massive dedication prayer Solomon made.
Look at the clear, plain text promise we see right here in verse 3. God tells Solomon, "I have heard the prayer and plea you have made." God declares that he himself has consecrated, meaning he has made holy this physical temple that Solomon built. God says he's putting his name there forever and that his eyes and his heart will always be there. Guys, this is a profound moment. The simple meaning here is that God fully accepts the building. He's validating all that hard work, the tons of gold, the cedar, and those 20 years of grueling effort by choosing to actually dwell there. Section 2, God's Covenant and Warning, a clear choice. Now you might think God is just handing Solomon a blank check of approval here, but he doesn't. In verses 4 through 9, God pivots. He establishes a very clear, conditional choice before Solomon. It's a covenant, an agreement with two very distinct paths. We've got a path of obedience with a massive reward and a path of disobedience with some severe, literal consequences. God is laying this out step by step, so neither Solomon nor the people of Israel can ever say they weren't warned. Let's take a look at the first path. In verses 4 and 5, God defines the positive condition. He says to Solomon, "As for you, if you walk before me in integrity of heart and uprightness, as David your father did, and do all I command and observe my decrees and laws." Then comes the big promise. "I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever." Notice how God uses David, Solomon's father, as the gold standard for integrity. To walk in integrity means to be wholehearted and totally dedicated to God's laws, just like David was. If Solomon does this, his royal dynasty will be secure indefinitely. It's a very straightforward, simple promise of a lasting legacy. However, verses 6 and 7 deliver a severe, contrasting warning. The text is completely unflinching here. God says, "But if you or your sons turn away from me and do not observe the commands, and go off to serve other gods and worship them, the consequences will be devastating." God states he will literally cut off Israel from the land he gave them, and he will reject the very temple he just consecrated. This clearly shows us in the plain text that God values the obedience and loyalty of his people way more than a beautiful building. The temple's holiness, it's entirely conditional on the people's faithfulness to God. And the text goes even further in verses 8 and 9. God explains the harsh historical reality of what will happen if they abandon him. Israel will become a byword and an object of ridicule among all peoples. That imposing, glorious temple, it'll become an appalling ruin. Passers-by are going to scoff and ask, "Why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this temple?" And the answer will be totally public knowledge, because they have forsaken the Lord their God, who brought their fathers out of Egypt, and have embraced other gods. The ruined temple will literally stand as a physical cautionary tale to the whole world about the consequences of idolatry. Section 3. The Deal with Hiram, Cities for Gold. Let's move on to verses 10 and 11, because the chapter shifts from this intense spiritual encounter to a very practical geopolitical transaction. Think about it. Building a temple and a palace over 20 years requires an astronomical amount of resources. To get all that, Solomon relied heavily on Hiram, the king of Tyre. Hiram had supplied Solomon with all the cedar, pine, and gold he could ever want. But now, well, it was time to settle the bill. So how exactly does Solomon pay back the king of Tyre? Verses 11 and 12 tell us that King Solomon gave 20 towns in the region of Galilee to Hiram. Just think about the scale of this, 20 entire towns. But the text reveals a really fascinating human moment right here. Hiram travels down from Tyre to inspect these towns Solomon gave him, and he is not pleased at all. He looks at this real estate and feels completely shortchanged. Verse 13 gives us an incredible detail about how Hiram reacts. Hiram asks Solomon, "What kind of towns are these you have given me, my brother?" And to publicly express his total dissatisfaction, he officially names the area the land of Kabul. To clarify this slightly difficult word, Kabul sounds like a Hebrew phrase that basically means good for nothing. So Hiram literally names the entire region good for nothing, and the text notes that this name stuck to that very day. It's kind of a hilarious historical reminder that even among ancient kings, a bad real estate deal can result in some serious, permanent, passive-aggressive naming.
But hey, despite Hiram's disappointment with the real estate, verse 14 makes sure we understand exactly how much wealth was involved in this relationship. Hiram had sent to King Solomon 120 talents of gold. To put that simple text into perspective for you, 120 talents is roughly equivalent to 4 metric tons of gold. That is a staggering, almost unimaginable amount of wealth transferring hands just to fund Solomon's empire. It really underscores the incredible scale of the economy Solomon was running at the time.
Section 4. Labor, cities, and ships, building an empire. So, having secured all the materials and the funding, Solomon needed a massive labor force to actually build everything. Verses 15 through 28 detail exactly how he acquired the manpower for his extensive building campaigns, what he actually built, and how he expanded his kingdom's reach all the way across the sea. Verse 15 gives us the master list. It introduces the account of the forced labor King Solomon conscripted. And what were they building? The text lists the major projects: the Lord's temple, his own royal palace, the Millo, the wall around Jerusalem, and the strategic fortified cities of Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. We really shouldn't rush past this. Rebuilding and fortifying these specific cities meant securing the major trade routes of the ancient world. Solomon wasn't just building pretty monuments, he was building a highly secure, economically powerful, fortified state. Let's clarify a couple of details from verses 16 through 19. First off, what exactly is the Millo? The simple definition is that these were large supporting terraces built by King Solomon to shore up the land in Jerusalem. Next, the text drops a fascinating historical footnote about the city of Gezer. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, had previously attacked Gezer, burned it to the ground, killed the Canaanites living there, and then gave the entire ruined city as a wedding gift to his daughter, who happened to be Solomon's wife. Solomon then took this unique wedding gift and rebuilt it. He also built up Lower Beth Horon, Baalath, and Tadmor in the desert, creating a vast network of store cities and towns just for his chariots and horses. So, the big question is, who did all this heavy lifting? Verses 20 through 22 draw a very clear distinction in how the labor was organized. Solomon conscripted his slave labor force from the descendants of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. These were the non-Israelite peoples remaining in the land. But the text explicitly states in verse 22 that Solomon did not make slaves of any of the Israelites. Instead, the Israelites served as his fighting men, his government officials, his officers, captains, and the commanders of his chariots. It became a highly stratified society based on this historical reality. Think about the sheer level of bureaucracy required to run all of this. Verse 23 tells us there were 550 chief officials who supervised Solomon's projects. They were the ones on the ground directing the people actually doing the work. You don't just build temples, palaces, and fortified cities across an entire nation without incredible organization and a massive chain of command. These 550 supervisors, they were the backbone of that entire effort. Then verse 24 gives us a quick chronological and logistical detail. It notes that after Pharaoh's daughter, Solomon's wife, moved from her previous residence in the city of David into the brand new palace Solomon had built specifically for her, it was only then that Solomon built those supporting terraces, the Millo. This is really interesting because it shows the step-by-step nature of his urban planning in Jerusalem. One massive project literally had to be completed and occupied before the next major structural reinforcement could even begin. But amidst all this intense empire building, verse 25 hits pause to remind us of Solomon's religious duties. 3 times a year, Solomon sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings on the altar he had built for the Lord. The text notes he burned incense before the Lord along with them, thus fulfilling his temple obligations.
It's a great reminder that even as a crazy busy king managing international trade and a massive labor force, he still maintained this rhythmic, structured religious observance 3 times annually.
Finally, in verses 26 and 27, we see Solomon expanding his reach to the sea. King Solomon built a fleet of ships at Ezion-Geber, which the text clarifies is near Elath in Edom, right on the shore of the Yam Suf, the Red Sea or Sea of Reeds. Now, because the Israelites were definitely not traditional seafarers, King Hiram of Tyre stepped in again. Hiram sent his own men, highly experienced sailors who actually knew the sea, to serve in the fleet alongside Solomon's men.
And the result of this joint naval venture? That's found right in verse 28, which concludes our walkthrough of the chapter. They sailed to the distant land of Ophir, a place famous in the ancient world for its insane wealth, and they brought back a staggering 420 talents of gold, delivering it directly to King Solomon. For some modern context, 420 talents is roughly 14 to 14.5 metric tons of pure gold. Solomon's wealth, powered by Hiram's maritime expertise, was reaching absolutely unprecedented heights.
Section 5. Key ideas and lessons. All right, we've just walked step by step through the literal events of the chapter. Now let's take a second to synthesize the simple ideas and practical takeaways. What is the text actually trying to teach us beyond just a history lesson about rocks, gold, and ancient treaties? How do these events apply to us today?
Here are 3 core themes we can draw out as practical life lessons. First up, God's covenants are conditional. God made it perfectly clear to Solomon that possessing a beautiful, holy building meant absolutely nothing if his heart turned to idolatry. Our relationship with what is right must be active. We can't just rest on past achievements. Second, wealth requires responsibility. Solomon managed literal tons of gold, massive labor forces, and complex international treaties. Tremendous resources require tremendous organization and ethical management. And third, integrity shapes the future. God set David's integrity as the ultimate benchmark for Solomon. The big lesson here is that our uprightness today directly impacts the security and the legacy we leave for the next generation.
Section 6. Chapter Recap. To wrap up, let's lock in what we've learned today. In Chapter 9, Solomon finishes a massive 20-year building phase. God appears and consecrates the temple, but clearly warns that obedience is required, otherwise the temple will become a total ruin and Israel will become a joke among the nations. Solomon then trades 20 Galilean towns to King Hiram of Tyre for gold and timber, a trade Hiram humorously names good for nothing. Finally, the chapter details Solomon's massive forced labor conscription of non-Israelites to build his fortified cities, and his highly successful joint naval venture with Hiram that brings back an absolute fortune in gold from Ophir.
Right now, Solomon is at the absolute peak of his wealth and geopolitical power. But with God's strict warning looming in the background, we really have to ask, can he maintain his integrity amidst all this massive success? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.